Tonight, all 5 people on board the Titanic submersible now presumed dead.
It is a difficult day for all of us.
A catastrophic implosion deep in the North Atlantic, the explorers killed, and the questions that remain. 16 portraits of love and loss carried in by the families of the seniors killed in Manitoba's horrific bus crash.
We have lost a tremendous amount of our families, our friends, and our neighbors.
And blocked. Is this the end of Canadian news on Facebook and Instagram?
It's not a win for anybody.
This is The National with Chief Correspondent Adrienne Arsenault.
A frantic international search that gripped people around the world has come to an end. The Titan submersible, lost with 5 crew members, has been found destroyed at the bottom of the sea. The sub was on an expedition to the world's most famous shipwreck, the Titanic. That wreck lies about 680 kilometers south of St. John's, nearly 4,000 meters below the surface, covering a wide debris field. It is about 500 meters from the bow section of the Titanic, where a remote piloted deep-sea drone found the Titan submersible in several pieces. The explorers on board now believed dead. Kayla Hounsell is in St. John's, where the search now turns to clues about what happened as those who knew the crew remember them.
This is the remotely operated vehicle that put an end to the race against time. The Odysseus 6K found debris on the ocean floor, ending a 3-day multinational search to find 5 people missing in a capsule designed to plunge into the depths.
The debris is consistent with a catastrophic implosion of the vessel.
The U.S. Coast Guard says it found 5 major pieces of the Titan. It doesn't know when the sub imploded, but it lost contact with its mother ship an hour and 45 minutes after it began its dive to the Titanic wreck Sunday morning. The Coast Guard was notified 8 hours later.
We've had sonar buoys in the water nearly continuously and have not detected any catastrophic events when those sonar buoys have been in the water.
And those banging sounds picked up by a Canadian aircraft providing hope of life, now thought to have no connection to the debris field. The company that owns the Titan says it believes all souls on board were killed.
PH is a wonderful man, very upbeat. He's a good friend.
For Larry Daly, all of this is personal. He dove the Titanic himself 20 years ago. His mentor was on board the Titan, French explorer Paul-Henri Nargeolet, known as Mr. Titanic.
He's more knowledge in this field than anyone I know. He's been there, done it all. He's probably got more T-shirts in his closet than anybody.
A 2017 interview makes it clear Nargeolet was clearly aware of the risks.
Stuck on the bottom, you can survive for a while because you can stay about 4 or 5 days on the bottom, which not help very much because if nobody can help you.
British billionaire Hamish Harding had flown to space and visited the South Pole.
He's the quintessential British explorer. He's very much an Englishman. He is very outgoing, very friendly, very personable.
We need to look at the perspective of women first, not just men.
Pakistani businessman Shahzada Dawood, seen here speaking at the United Nations, took the trip with his son, Suleiman, just 19.
We have our control screen here.
And Stockton Rush, the CEO of OceanGate, which owns the Titan. In 2018, dozens of scientists penned a letter to Rush outlining safety concerns with his experimental approach. The man behind it all, now a victim of his own creation.
Kayla, there's just so much here we simply don't know.
Yeah, Adrienne, there are still so many questions about exactly what happened, when, how, and why. The U.S. Coast Guard says some of the teams that have been working on this have those questions as well. It will continue its remote operations of the seafloor to try to get some more information here. But beyond that, people will be wondering about the safety and regulation of this kind of exploration, Adrienne.
All right, Kayla Hounsell in St. John's tonight. Thank you. So some good questions from Kayla there about what remains unknown about what happened in the North Atlantic. Crucially, what happened when and why. That's why Tom Detweiler is here. Tom led the team that discovered the Titanic in '85, was a friend of Paul-Henri Nargeolet. So Tom, you have to be exhausted in addition to grieving. I suspect you have a lot of questions too, but can you help us understand something? When do you think something went wrong, and why do you think that?
Well, the submarine was communicating on a 15-minute schedule, and they had one communication that was normal, and then communications went away. And I think it was shortly after the one successful communication that the hull imploded. The reason I think that is that the submarine has a beacon on it which the ship talks to, and that's how they figure out the position of the submarine. And that's normally independent of the sub's systems. So even if the power shut down in the sub, usually the beacon will still work. So the fact that that went away at the same time that communications went away made me think almost immediately that it was an implosion and that beacon was damaged.
Tom, as I understand it, are you talking about a time frame during the descent?
Yes, the descent is the most dangerous part for a submersible, constantly increasing the pressure on the hull. And so that's when things going to fail. If you make it to your dive, you know, the maximum depth that you're going to go to, you're generally okay at that point. You can conduct the rest of the dive with no problem.
And from what we know of the debris field, when you look at what was recovered, what does that suggest to you about what happened?
Well, the two hemispheres, one at each end of the cylinder, which made up the hull, were blown off and found in separate debris fields. And I think that indicates that you had a very sudden collapse of that cylinder in the middle, which then popped those off the ends and deposited them on the bottom.
Terrible. Tom Detweiler, we really appreciate your insight tonight.
You're welcome.
So the Titan sub offered one of the only windows into a world as hostile as it is mysterious, the extreme depths of the ocean. But as Ithel Musa tells us, there's now concern what this disaster could mean for future exploration and research.
When you first go underwater.
For Stockton Rush, the deep sea was a new frontier.
The ocean is a scary spot. And what I wanted to do with the business was just move the needle, get people excited about the ocean, explore the ocean, and discover what was out there.
Rush's company, OceanGate, was known for transporting wealthy adventurers to sites like the wreck of the Titanic. But he was also committed to helping scientists explore the ocean.
We have remotely operated vehicles that can go off of boats, but very little work had been done with submersibles where you can actually go down and see for yourself, first person, what's going on.
The Sea Dock Society at UC Davis says 3 deep-sea projects in the San Juan Islands would not have been possible without OceanGate's Cyclops 1 submersible.
It was very exciting because, you know, these people had expressed interest. I'd always thought about this. I never knew this was possible. Now you're giving us the opportunity to do this.
But there is concern the catastrophic implosion that killed everyone on board the Titan submersible may bring critical research to a halt.
I think it will set things back. And you know, maybe that's a good thing. You set things back, you reassess safety margins.
Salome Buglass has been in 3 different research submersibles, including Alvin, owned by the U.S. Navy.
Given the risks of these types of operations, it's always good to revisit and make safety a priority. But I think in the long term, I don't think it's going to affect research of the deep sea.
Buglass says while being inside a submersible is a breathtaking experience, for commercial ventures, this tragedy may serve as a wake-up call. Ithel Musa, CBC News, Toronto.
We now have some more answers in another tragedy, this one in Manitoba, where we learned the names of all 16 people who died in that horrific bus crash. All of them seniors, all of them on a trip to the casino when their bus and a truck collided. The collision shocked the country and the community of Dauphin, where most of them lived. And that is where Cam McIntosh is tonight, where the community gathered. Cam?
Well, Adrienne, between those that were killed and those that are injured, there are nearly 24 families, and each of them is dealing with an individual tragedy. But this is also a community tragedy, and not just for Dauphin, but other communities around it. So tonight, hundreds gathered here to remember.
As we now bow our heads in sorrow and grief.
Shocked by tragedy, Dauphin is now sharing its grief at this vigil tonight.
Amen.
After the names of the dead were officially released this afternoon. A solemn procession of family members and first responders, carrying the faces of the tragedy. 16 people, all seniors, including a married couple, remembered as husbands, wives, mothers, fathers, grandparents, and great-grandparents.
Louis Bretisher, Margaret Furcalo, Vanjie Gilchrist, Anne Hill, Helen Coufflet, Arlene Lindquist, Diane Midwood, Nettie Nakonechny, Shirley Novolkowski, Frank Pergillo, Rose Pergillo, Jean Rosenkrantz, Donna Shodra, Lillian Stobie, Patsy Zamerkut, Claudia Zerba.
Last Thursday, all 16 were riding in a minibus on a senior's day trip to a casino. Near Carberry, Manitoba, the bus was struck as it crossed the Trans-Canada Highway by a semi-trailer truck. Police say the truck had the right-of-way.
The word tragedy has been used a lot over the last week, but never has that word had as much meaning as it does when we look at the photographs that line this room.
Also in the room, some first responders to the scene. Neither they nor the families spoke. Manitoba Premier Heather Stephenson met privately with the families.
You know, my heart goes out to all of them.
Meanwhile, police say it could take months to pore over crash scene evidence to determine whether there was criminal negligence, as the community waits for answers.
The next few days and weeks and months will be difficult. We have lost a tremendous amount of our families, our friends, and our neighbors.
So, Cam, the answers will come later. Any plans for a community memorial beyond that vigil?
No, at least not yet. Now, these are early days, and speaking with the mayor here, he admits that they're having a hard time really coming up with a plan that would be appropriate here to deal with something of this magnitude. But they felt compelled to have this vigil tonight because this weekend is the high school graduation, and they want that to remain as much of a celebration as possible while still acknowledging what's happened here. And the mayor also says that it may be reflective of the culture of the community and the age of the victims, that many families would choose to mourn more privately. And funerals are beginning, and many are planned for next week. Adrienne?
All right, Cam McIntosh in Dauphin, Manitoba. Thank you, Cam. So Meta is getting out of the news business for Canadians, saying it has to in order to comply with a brand new federal law. For tens of millions of Facebook and Instagram users, it is the end of the line for those links. Kate McKenna on how it came to this.
Meta says starting soon, Canadians won't be able to see or share news articles on Facebook and Instagram.
I don't think it's a surprise, but I think nevertheless, I think it's disastrous, quite frankly, for everyone.
The decision is in response to a brand new law known as C-18.
And this is a business decision that we're being forced to make by this legislation. We wish we were not in this position. We don't want to have to make this decision.
The bill aims to turn engagement into cash. It requires tech giants to pay for linking to Canadian news sites, and it was supposed to inject money into Canadian journalism. In a statement, Meta says, "We are confirming that news availability will be ended on Facebook and Instagram for all users in Canada prior to the Online News Act, Bill C-18, taking effect."
We can have that company coming here and say, oh, okay, Government of Canada, we don't like what you're doing, and because we don't like what you're doing, this is how we're going to react and impact Canadians. I think that's unacceptable.
Canadians having less access to content is not a win. It's not a win for anybody.
But many Canadian publishers say C-18 is important for their survival.
There are Canadian media operations that care about communities. They're big and small. They're there every single day. And you've got a massive American corporation that's generated billions of dollars annually in revenue saying, we want all the playground for ourselves.
But others say without real news, fake news will fill the void.
I think it's worrisome for a number of reasons. We know that if you get your information from social media, from Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, you're more likely to believe misinformation, more likely to spread misinformation.
As for when Meta will remove news, it's not clear. The company says it'll happen sometime over the next few months. Meanwhile, Google says the government hasn't met any of its concerns. The Heritage Minister says his door is open. Kate McKenna, CBC News, Ottawa.
Ontario police are facing questions tonight about why they didn't act sooner to stop an alleged poison seller. In a CBC News investigation, Thomas Daigle found a concerned parent who says her warning to police could have saved lives.
More than 20 lives, each cut short. The number of deaths suspected of being linked to an alleged poison seller keeps growing. But could police have stopped Kenneth Law sooner? A mother in northwestern Ontario is sure of it.
They could have saved all those lives if they would have started an investigation last year. And it pisses me off.
We agreed to conceal the woman's identity given the sensitive nature of the topic. She told us her 22-year-old daughter tried to take her own life last year, and she provided us with this credit card receipt linking Kenneth Law's company to that suicide attempt.
She was going into seizures. She was vomiting at the same time, so I got her up on her side. I was on the phone with 911. She almost died. It was horrible.
Law was arrested last month and charged with counseling or aiding suicide in connection with 2 deaths near Toronto. Police allege he sold a toxic substance online to vulnerable clients here and around the world. Law denies all allegations. He hasn't been charged for any deaths abroad. The loved ones of Noel Ramirez in Colorado blame him for their grief.
My daughter should still be here and would still be here without Kenneth Law.
After his own loss, Martin Keary in England ordered the poison to see how easy it would be.
It's weird that someone sent this to me and its purpose was to kill me.
Police say Law also sold hoods and masks meant for self-harm. Now he's awaiting a bail hearing Friday, and Keary is concerned Law will be released.
You wouldn't really want him thinking, oh, well, here's my last chance to get in a couple more orders. That'd be my number one worry, considering how incredibly simple it was for him to just mail people this stuff.
For families who've lost loved ones, the road to justice is only beginning.
It could be a long road. You have been on this story since it first broke. What's your sense of where the investigation goes from here?
Well, Peel Regional Police have said that if new evidence comes to light, there could be more charges. Keep in mind, though, one of the big challenges here is the massive size of the investigation and how many jurisdictions are involved. Just in Ontario, 11 police agencies are taking part in this investigation. Overseas, there's the National Crime Agency in Britain, the FBI in the United States, Interpol. We've been in touch with authorities in Australia and Italy. In Britain, keep in mind, police there had looked into Kenneth Law at least twice before, but always declined to pursue charges against him. And what Peel police are telling me now is they have evidence that those businesses that he operated went back to 2020.
It's extraordinary. Thomas, thank you.
You're welcome.
If you or someone you know is struggling, there is help available. You can call Talk Suicide Canada at 1-833-456-4566, or you can text 45645 between 4 p.m. and midnight Eastern. Now, more than 400 wildfires are burning across Canada tonight. About half are considered out of control. So that includes a fire in northern Quebec, inching closer to the town of Lebel-sur-Quévillon. Thousands are being forced to evacuate for the second time in just a few weeks. India's Prime Minister is in the U.S. tonight for a high-profile state visit with even higher stakes.
Welcome, Mr. Prime Minister. Welcome back to the White House.
What the two sides agreed to and the controversy hanging over the meeting. Plus, moving one step closer to a public inquiry on foreign interference.
A lot of the obstruction that we're seeing is moving away, and that we're having really constructive conversations.
Rosie, an at-issue breakdown why a deal could be reached within days. and a moment of compassion that saved a little life. We're back at 2. Well, that's terrifying. This sudden, hard-punching hailstorm struck a concert venue near Denver, Colorado, sending people scrambling for cover in washrooms, under tables, anywhere that offered a bit of protection. The golf ball-sized hail shattered car windshields, left as many as 90 people with non-life-threatening injuries. India's Prime Minister is getting the full red carpet welcome from the White House. All this for a leader who was once denied travel to the U.S. over allegations of human rights abuses. Watching all this with a perspective from India is our South Asia correspondent, Salima Shivji.
A very warm welcome as the U.S. president plays host to India's Narendra Modi.
Welcome, Mr. Prime Minister. Welcome back to the White House.
In front of a boisterous crowd some 7,000 strong. Pomp typically reserved for the closest of allies, a surefire sign for many that the U.S. sees India as an indispensable friend.
God bless America.
There's unprecedented trust between the two leaders, Modi said ahead of the visit. They also need each other badly, experts say, to counter an aggressive China in the Indo-Pacific.
It is very important that
the trip is a defining moment for an India rising on the global stage, says this Mumbai-based foreign policy expert.
And you've got the United States once again really holding out its hand and saying the most important country in the world wants to be your friend, and here is a hand of friendship. We're going to give you whatever we know you need in terms of defense.
The two countries signed deals promising that India will buy armed U.S. drones and both will build American fighter jet engines in India.
This state visit is a historic one. Modi is in select company, one of the few foreign leaders invited to address Congress twice.
I extend my deepest gratitude.
But several members of Congress skipped the speech in protest over the Indian government's treatment of its Muslim minority, the erosion of democratic rights and press freedoms in Modi's India, a complication that Biden has to contend with as he woos his new friend.
One grounded on democracy.
The president alluded to it in the Oval Office and was asked point blank by reporters.
The Prime Minister and I had a good discussion about democratic values. That's the nature of our relationship. We're straightforward with each other.
The same question to Prime Minister Modi, who brushed off any criticism over how his government treats minorities, saying there's no question of discrimination.
So, Salima, that's interesting. That answer from Narendra Modi in itself is unprecedented.
It's very rare. He really hasn't taken questions from reporters at a press conference for most of his 9 years in office. So it gives you a sense of how India's prime minister feels about challenges from the media. So Biden being able to coax Modi into answering 2 questions is something. But the issue over how to square how the U.S. is strengthening its ties with India, despite criticism over how it treats minorities and political opponents, won't go away so easily. No matter how many times Modi uses the word democracy, which he did over and over in his speech to Congress. That got lots of applause and standing ovations. The message is India very clearly is a key ally for the U.S. moving forward.
All right, Salima Shivji in our Mumbai bureau. Thank you. The NHL says it will no longer allow its teams to use what it calls cause-based warm-up jerseys. At some Pride-themed games this past season, several players declined to wear the jerseys. Some of them cited religious reasons. The NHL says the specialty nights themselves will continue, but without the jerseys, which it called a distraction. Amid a wave of anti-LGBTQ legislation in the U.S., tomorrow night on The National, we're going to take you to Texas. Paul Hunter went there to find the real human impact of a new law prohibiting gender-affirming treatment for trans kids.
You're a girl.
Yeah.
You were born in a boy's body.
Mm-hmm. I don't think there is any other word to describe myself than a girl.
For years, Audrey had been bullied, afraid, depressed, and yes, suicidal. Until
the first time that I met Dr. Lopez, mostly I was thinking about how they would finally, accept me. Transitioning in Texas, that's tomorrow night on The National.
After the break, Rosie's here with that issue. Hey, Rosie, how are you feeling?
Adrienne, I am on the mend, as you can hear. Tonight, as the House of Commons adjourns for the summer, what might the government do to reset for the months ahead?
Will you shuffle your cabinet before the fall sitting?
I'm going into a cabinet meeting right now. We're going to have a lot of good work to do, and I have nothing to announce.
Is a cabinet shuffle or something more in the cards? Chantal, Althea, and Andrew will join me to talk about that and more. Hi there, I'm Rosemary Barton. Here's what's at issue this week. The House of Commons has adjourned for the summer, but there's already talk of a cabinet shuffle in the coming weeks.
Will you shuffle your cabinet before the fall sitting?
I'm going into a cabinet meeting right now. We're going to have a lot of good work to do, and I have nothing to announce.
Radio-Canada has learned the groundwork for a cabinet change has been laid after a few difficult months for the government in an attempt to move some ministers struggling in portfolios and to send a signal to Canadians the government has not run out of steam. So is there something that the Liberals can do or should do to demonstrate that they haven't been around too long and that they still have the ideas and energy needed to get the work done? Is a cabinet shuffle inevitable? Let's bring in our panelists, Chantal Hébert, Andrew Coyne, and Althea Raj. Good to see you all. I'm not going to make you, say who's in, who's out. We're not going to do that. Don't worry, because I know you all would throw things at me. Yeah, but I will ask the question whether the government needs to demonstrate something to Canadians who do seem to think that they've just been around a long time and are a bit stuck. And what might that be, that tool, Chantal?
Possibly. Whether a cabinet shuffle is something that will work miracles as the mood for change sets in is very dubious. I've not seen very many cabinet shuffles result in a sea change in attitudes towards the government. Although it is good practice once in a while to kind of shake out your cabinet, but not for the reasons of coming back. I think many Liberals this week would say, well, maybe Canadians are getting tired of us, but they're still voting for us. We did okay in those by-elections. Our vote is resilient. So it isn't as if we are looking at a cabinet shuffle to save us from a huge peril. That might be a bit of a short read on the part of the Liberals, but still those by-election results worked out to be a narrative-busting event for the notion that the Liberals were going nowhere very, very fast.
Okay, and we're going to talk about the by-elections in the next segment, so don't go too far down that rabbit hole. And I should say that if you want to play the game of who's in and who's out of cabinet, please don't let me stop you. I just know you all very well, and it seems unlikely. So, Andrew, could a cabinet shuffle, I mean, sometimes that just presents a different image to Canadians, right? And sometimes that sort of just changes the way people, including the media, start talking about government. But is there something else that might be needed here?
Well, that's virtually all that cabinets and cabinet shuffles are good for, is presenting an image. If they really wanted to send a signal of change and invigoration, et cetera, they'd cut the cabinet in half. We don't need to have 40 cabinet ministers. The fact that we do tells you all you need to know about what cabinet has become. It's essentially for signaling to various demographics that you're on their side. It's hiring spokespeople who can present the government's message effectively, but it's not actually for ministers who will actually have serious responsibilities, serious roles, serious autonomy and independence. So yeah, cabinet shuffles give us in the media something to speculate about and show how in the know we are, but they don't actually, I agree with Chantal, I can't remember the last one that actually signaled something substantive and serious in terms of a change of direction. This government, I think, will be ill-disposed for the reasons Chantal suggested to take any bold steps because they have very little to lose and very little to gain. Voting patterns now are so entrenched, certainly between the right and the left, that there's not a lot to be gained for that. They can win elections, they can win minorities, as we've seen in the last two elections with 30-odd% of the vote. They've got 30% that simply won't desert them no matter what. And if they can govern again with the NDP support, why would they want to make any bold new ventures or take any chances?
Althea.
So I tend to see things a little bit differently. I
Good.
don't disagree with some of what Andrew said, but I do actually think we're going to have a much bigger cabinet shuffle than we've had in a long while. We really haven't had a cabinet shuffle since the last election because we only basically had a little bit of tinkering in last August. And yes, cabinet is all the things Andrew mentioned in terms of regional representation, and you keep members in cabinet who are reflective of certain communities. That might be good for fundraising. But at the end of the day, cabinet ministers are still in charge of their departments, and who you put in charge of your department can actually make a difference. Sean Fraser, for example, seems to be a much better or more productive immigration minister than immigration ministers that we had previously. So I think that we can't dismiss that part. The other part of making a cabinet is about caucus management. You have a lot of actually pretty competent people who ran in 2015 for Justin Trudeau, under the impression, probably for many, that they were going to make it into cabinet and haven't yet still. And they're getting a little impatient. And just to ensure that there is mobility in the ranks and that the caucus is happy, I think that will be bigger than we expect. The trouble, though, is it's kind of hard to dump people once they have been in cabinet for a while. So unless they tell you they're walking out the door, it can be a little tricky. And lead to some unpleasantness, as we saw with Jody Wilson-Raybould or Mark Garneau.
So suppose, for speculation's sake, that Chrystia Freeland moves on to something else and there is a change at finance. That's a major change. It's a major cabinet shuffle. Suppose that all it is about is shuffling a few chairs to make caucus members happy and to dispose of Marco Mendicino, who's been having a hard time in his portfolio. That really is something that no Canadian is going to stop his or her vacation over, to say, gee, this is a new government. It's now got energy. Marco is no longer around the cabinet table. Yes, some ministers make a difference. For instance, Stephen Guilbeault at Environment does make a difference to voting prospects for the government in Quebec, but that is where he is. So a lot of the current ministers who are strong, do you really want to replace Dominique Leblanc or shuffle him in a lesser role?
But nobody's suggesting that. There's still like 40 members that they can play with.
But what I'm trying to say is the question was, will it change the optics on the government? My take on this is if it's really substantial, yes, people will pay attention. But if they're shuffling a few chairs because they have talent in caucus, by the time those names are named, they may not be in government anymore.
We're trying to set the bar for when we're going to come in, really, during our summer holidays to talk about this, in part. Andrew, would prorogation do it? Would a throne speech be a more substantive message that there is something that needs to happen here? Or maybe none of these things are necessary. I don't know.
Well, I mean, we've seen them use prorogations before to get out of hot water, and they're in a bit of hot water right now, so that would be nervy. To try that again. I'm not sure you can use that, to get out of a public inquiry, but we shall see. No, look, there's two things that are really bedeviling them. One is the sense of drift and lack of direction. You know, they had bold plans in their first government, and they executed a lot of those. There's not been a lot of direction in the last couple of years. And secondly, just the sense that they're behind the eight ball. They're overwhelmed. They're way behind on judicial appointments, on all kinds of things where it's just simply executing. And again, a large part of that is they're trying to run everything through the PMO, and there's only so much that a half a dozen people can do.
Okay, 30 seconds or so to you, Althea, then we'll move on.
Well, I agree with that last part, but I think that there's still an opportunity in a cabinet shuffle to signal the things that you're trying to tell Canadians you care about. So, for example, housing. Housing has been a big issue. Pierre Poilievre, the Conservative leader, has put that on the radar as an issue. The current housing minister, not the greatest communicator. If we have a cabinet shuffle and it's large, I would expect that Ahmed Hussein, unfortunately, gets another job, because you need to have somebody who can go toe-to-toe on the issues that the government says it cares about and hasn't successfully delivered on.
Okay, all good points. We're going to take a short break. When we come back, we're going to talk about the by-elections that Chantal hinted at. The Liberals and Conservatives both held seats in Monday's by-election. What do they tell us, if anything? That's next on The National. Welcome to another round of At Issue. This week saw Liberals and Conservatives hold 2 seats apiece in Monday's federal by-elections. With 4 seats up for grabs, early polls suggested a slump in Liberal support. But despite this, they were able to hold on to seats in Winnipeg South Centre and Notre-Dame-de-Grâce Westmount. For the Conservatives, they were able to hold on to Oxford and defeat PPC leader Maxime Bernier in Portage-Lisgar. So what should we read into these results? What do they tell us about the current political landscape and how parties maybe should adapt? Let's bring everybody back. Chantal, Andrew, and Althea. Andrew, why don't you start us off? Should the Conservatives, let's start with the Conservatives because we talked about the Liberals more in the first block. Should the Conservatives be happy, relieved, concerned about how these by-elections played out?
Very concerned, and I would couple them with the Mississauga Lakeshore by-election last December. You see a similar pattern in all of them, virtually all of them, where the Conservative vote is down. In a by-election, usually opposition parties do well in by-elections, but it's particularly the pattern here, which is they're, on the one hand, bleeding support to their left, to the center. Why do I say that? Because the support for the People's Party went down, which you would think would benefit the Tories, and yet the Tories' overall vote also went down in 3 of the 4 ridings. So that suggests that they're losing more votes to the Liberals than they're gaining from the People's Party. And equally concerning, I think, to them is that the NDP vote is down quite sharply. Now, there might be a lot of reasons for that, but one of them might well be if the political strategy for the Liberals is to scare NDP voters into voting Liberal because the Conservatives are so awful and so mean and so nasty. If you've got a leader who seems to validate those fears, that's going to help that strategy. So looking at these, as I say, in by-elections after the government had taken a pounding for the last several months, for them not to improve their standing, let alone to see their standing go down, has got to be very concerning.
So what do you say, Chantal, to people who say, well, it's just a by-election? Because that's certainly what Conservatives would say when you put some of those points to them.
Yeah, of course. And would they be saying that if they didn't prove their share of the vote? I mean, Pierre Trudeau, Justin's father, held 15 by-elections in 1978 and came out with 2 and lost half a dozen to the Conservatives. And a year later, he was out of government. That is what happens to governments who are at the end of their rope electorally. The share of the Liberal vote actually went up. What that tells me is it's not stop Liberals before you think you're so great. Mostly, Pierre Poilievre is convincing Liberals who are tired with their own party to come out and vote for their party. And as Andrew points out, he's also probably convincing New Democrat voters that they're better off voting for the stronger alternative to the Conservatives. I would call that a serious warning to the Conservatives and to Pierre Poilievre. At this rate, he is single-handedly fighting the mood for change and convincing people that while they may be tired of Justin Trudeau, they have not seen an alternative that they feel they can vote for.
And our Conservatives, are they concerned, Althea, from anyone that you're talking to or hearing from?
When they go out of their way to tell you that by-elections don't matter, yes, I would say they are concerned. There was an event on the Hill this week because one of our colleagues from the National Post, John Ivison, is leaving. And there were a lot of Conservatives there who made the point that by-elections don't matter and they're not at all concerned, unprompted. So that, I think, tells you what you need to know. I agree with everything that was said. I think that the decision that was made to basically go scorched earth in Portage-Lisgar, this is the riding where Maxime Bernier was running, where they had a candidate basically attend rallies talking about how he believes that there's only 2 genders, that he would never have voted on the bill that got unanimous consent under Aaron O'Toole's leadership on conversion therapy, banning conversion therapy, where the Conservative Party used their own social media accounts to fuel the conspiracy theory on the World Economic Forum. This is this story percolating around the internet that suggests that the World Economic Forum is a world government, and along with the Trudeau cabinet, they want to strip you of your private property. Sometimes it's not just private property, it's they want to install microchips in your body or whatever. That the party would use its officials' account to perpetuate this kind of theory. And at the end of the day, no matter how many times they plastered through mailings pictures of Maxime Bernier walking in a pride parade suggesting how awful this was, the PPC still got 17% of the vote. So they wasted all this effort. They hurt themselves. They gave the Liberals ammunition for the next election campaign For what purpose?
Yeah.
Maxime Bernier says he's not going anywhere.
That's
they
right.
did not destroy him, and they have hurt themselves everywhere else in return.
So yeah, go ahead, Andrew.
Well, and then meanwhile, in Winnipeg South Centre, which is a gettable riding, I'm not saying they were likely to win it, but it's a riding that they have won in the past when they formed government. It's the kind of riding they need to win. They went from an 18-point margin of defeat just 2 years ago to a 32-point margin of defeat. I would be really worried if I was Conservative looking
Well, they
at that
didn't even try in that riding. Yeah, Chantal.
Well, if you don't try in ridings that you win when you win, where do you try?
Shows their
and
priorities.
If the point is to kill the People's Party, I'm sure that can be achieved since those people used to vote Conservative, but that will not get you to government.
So, like, surely the strategy will change then, will it not? Given all the things that you're saying here, you would think that there would be a lesson, and then they would apply the lesson, and you know, Chantal.
I think those results, if the Conservatives want to, are a gift to the Conservatives, because they send the party and its leader a message that they can use to recast. There is enough time to do it.
Yeah,
if they choose to read that message, I think it could be a bad gift to the Liberals, because it could make them think, oh, well, we're okay. Let's just keep going. Look, everything that happened all spring had no impact. And that would be really dangerous. So I've always believed that the party who did best on those by-elections was probably getting the more dangerous result, as opposed to the party who got that message. I'm not saying that I know that Pierre Poilievre will take that message and work with it, but it's a useful one to get with so many months before another election.
Andrew and Althea, both quickly.
The question is whether they will take that message. The people around Poilievre, like Poilievre, I think are very heavily invested in the idea that they know best, that we've tried the other way and it didn't work, that that's just mushy, mamby-pamby stuff. We've got to give people the raw meat and get out the base. And whether they're capable of shifting from that strategy, I think, is really an open question.
Well, and they seem very, very focused on the People's Party. I will say that as well. This is evidence of that, too. Last word to you, Althea.
Well, I wonder if it will embolden some of the progressive Conservatives that are in caucus who feel like they have lost their voice. Now they have something to point to when they make their arguments in caucus.
Okay, good conversation, everyone. So that's it. I'm freeing you temporarily for the summer. But
unless there's a cabinet shuffle.
Yeah, keep your phones close to you. Sleep with them.
Big cabinet shuffle.
Okay. Message received. Thank you all very much. It's always good to have you here. And as I said, Adishu has now also adjourned. Not for the summer. We'll be back if there's big news. Otherwise, we'll take a couple months off. Thanks for watching. As always, we appreciate it. And with that, I'll send things back to Adrienne in Toronto.
You bet. Thanks, Rosie. Coming up, giving a big hand to a very little bird.
I was afraid even to hold it, like you're afraid of breaking it.
The rescue that has social media humming in our moment. Look at that little guy, a hummingbird, of course. The last thing Adam Ritchie expected to find in his rain gauge last week. But as he made the rounds on his honey farm, there it was, trapped and seemingly injured. So he swapped his beekeeper's hat and took on the role of veterinarian, saving the tiny creature's life. His compassion is our moment.
It's like this tiny thing in your hands. Yeah, it was amazing. So we operate a farm where we produce honey. So I went out on Tuesday morning to empty the rain gauge. I looked inside and there was a hummingbird. At first I thought it had drowned. So I sort of stuck it in a cardboard box with a little bit of paper towel and then made a little bit of the syrup for them and tried feeding it with a spoon, but he just didn't really have enough, I think, life in him yet. And then he just slowly, with a little bit of warmth and time, he sort of like just recharged, basically. He could start to flutter his wings, catch himself if he was off balance. It was so small. Like even when you go to pick it up, I was afraid even to hold it. Like you're afraid of breaking it. It's so finely structured. Whenever he had his strength back, then he flew off on his own. So it just sort of seemed like the right thing to do. No, a wonderful experience overall.
Yeah, good for you, Adam. So our producer, Andrew, has been sending me kind of fun facts about hummingbirds. I might now be obsessed. Apparently, their hearts can beat more than 1,000 times a minute, and even at rest, they breathe about 250 breaths per minute. Please do not try this at home. That is the national for June 22nd. Thank you for being with us. Have a good night.